A young man looks on in horror, completely confused on what was going on. As he leaves his high school with his completion certificate, he gets hit by someone throwing a crumpled piece of paper at his head. Back then, he thought his high school life was finally over. But somehow, right now, he found himself in the middle of an entrance ceremony. To top it all off, the scene feels awfully familiar. It was the opening scene of the game he was just about to start playing. He's dumbfounded as he looks up at the stage with a large banner saying Cherry Blossom Academy Entrance Ceremony. Students of all kinds surround him with seemingly different looks and personalities. The young man glances around him, still questioning the absurd scene around him. No matter how he looked at it, the scene around him was the opening scene of a super popular VR or virtual reality game he had plans to play. However, he hadn't had the opportunity to start the part-time job to pay for it yet. But he did see the scene in the strategy guide he bought beforehand. Kinda crazy to buy the strategy guide first before buying the game itself, but go off, I guess. A rather harsh-looking man passionately greets the students by calling them youngsters who should risk their lives in service to their country. The young man watches the scene play out, his face blank. He remembers that in the game, dungeons suddenly showed up around the 30s. Dungeons were gateways to other worlds. Their ancestors built that military academy, Cherry Blossom Academy, right on top of one of the dungeons. Since then, the Imperial Army withdrew from the academy and it got turned into a school for explorers instead. That was the setting of the original game. Magic stones and items produced by the monsters found in dungeons are so powerful that they can change the entire power structure of the nation. There's fierce competition for the resources from the dungeons all over the world, which turned the Cherry Blossom Academy into a brutal battlefield for influence and power. That's quite the backstory for a school called Cherry Blossom. Explorers are the ones who obtain said items and are treated fairly well by the country. Furthermore, the power someone obtains by defeating monsters can be displayed as a level. High-level explorers can have all the riches and fame they desire, but when the principal says the students risk their lives, that was no exaggeration. It was common knowledge that some people die fighting monsters. The guidebook he bought made that clear. Suddenly, the young man notices someone in the front row of seats. It was an excited-looking girl wearing a long ponytail. The man's eyes widened. She was one of the love interests of the game, Shinguji Ayano. The academy has classes separated into ability from A to C. A to C are like regular classes. They've already gone into the dungeons and gained experience and levels. Right from the time he was enrolled, he was placed in Class D. Seat order was based on rank and his seat was at the very back. He mourns the current state of things. Poor guy is screwed on all fronts, I see. His hands find themselves rummaging under the desk, and to his surprise, he pulls out a thick book. He exclaims in disbelief. It was the original game's strategy guide he bought. Suddenly, an older man in front calls out his name. The young man named Takasugi panics as he answers back to the teacher. His classmates had turned to look at him, but they quickly turned back to the teacher. The boy in front of Takasugi comments that he was a weirdo staring at a blank book. Takasugi pauses. He opens the book to check for his character role. His name was Takasugi Takashi. He was an unlucky student with the worst grades. He'll eventually cross paths with the protagonist, which ends badly for him, eventually making him leave the school. During the original game, the player can hear rumors of his death. Takasugi has very low stats and poses no threat as an enemy. Ends up quite a sympathetic character considering his role in the story. The Takasugi in the present is more than horrified and pissed. After all, his character dies and all there was to say was he was sympathetic. That's the equivalent of someone dying going, "Aw, that's too bad," and moving on in the same sentence, "Mao." Takasugi complains that if he was going to be reincarnated into a game world, he should have been made the main character. Mourning, he asks why he was made the worst character at the school who leaves the plot right away. He pulls at his hair at the idea that he even ends up fighting the protagonist and dying. Knowing that, he was already planning on staying as far away from the protagonist as possible. Suddenly, he gets a stroke of genius and comes up with the idea that maybe this was the chance for him to change his life. Staring down at the book in his hands, he wonders if he can become the strongest in the world with the strategy guide. Not only that, but the school was swarming with beautiful love interests. The guide details how to go down their routes. Takasugi pauses, thinking over his chances. Back in class, the teacher raises a small, almost clear tablet. Each student was going to be given one. In one of the tables, a student is being crowded by others for having amazing stats. The boy being surrounded smiles with the others. Takasugi is left alone at his own table, nervously sure that the boy might be the protagonist of the original game. He turns to the tablet on his own table and turns it on. On the tablet, it details his current stats. He was at level 1 overall and a level 1 apprentice. 10 health points, 5 mana points, 9 in strength, 12 in magic, 7 in agility, 13 in endurance, and finally 8 in will. He raises an eyebrow at apprentice, unsure what it meant. He had no idea how things worked, but as soon as he learned the values, he could bring them up in his mind. Her suddenly knew about skills, equipment, and class change as well. It looked like he did it all in his mind. He snapped out of his thoughts when someone yells at him. A terrifying and burly student looks down at him smugly. Takasugi stays quiet, unsure what to say. The student leans over his table and looks at his table, cruelly saying that it was a miracle he got into the academy with stats like that. Before Takasugi could react, the student leaves his own tablet on the table and takes Takasugi's tablet. He holds it up beyond reach. He mocks Takasugi, asking him if he was just cursed and saying that he's never seen anyone have stats with only a single digit. He continues to laugh at him. Meanwhile, Takasugi glances at the student's tablet. His name was Furuta Masao. His stats were all double digits, making Takasugi cringe. He wasn't the hero, so he guessed that Furuta's stats were just normal stats and were already in the double digits. Furuta suddenly goes further away from his table and shares Takasugi's tablet to the others in the classroom, still laughing at him. Takasugi grits his teeth in silence before he sighs in resignation, trying to calm himself. He brings the guidebook out again. He brings himself down for thinking he was going to be the strongest. He sinks into his seat. Soon he was going to be dead trash. He flips through the guidebook and stops at a certain page. In large letters it said, "The absolute best, undeniable, fastest way to beat the game." He blinks at the page, reading about the fastest way again. It said that the strongest build was available and there was no need to reset the stats. Following the guide would help any character become powerful, giving them the ability to deal max damage and solo the final boss. For starters, Twin Lapicus magic swords and reverse counter technique is the strangest ability combination in the game. It was possible to go down the magic route as well, and if someone wanted to just finish the game, there were faster ways. Takasugi gets a diabolical grin on his face as he keeps reading. Devilishly, he reassures himself that by using the guidebook, he'll become the strongest. His thinking is cut off when a figure wearing a beaded bracelet comes towards him. They hand him a tablet. It was a lovely girl with long dark hair. She was handing him his tablet. Takasugi's eyes widened, recognizing the girl. The girl was Hanagasaki Reika. Takasugi has seen her in a TV ad for the game. She was the most popular love interest according to the popularity poll. Takasugi is mesmerized by her. However, she takes one glance at his tablet and her expression changes. Takasugi internally screams as she sees his stats, finding it completely embarrassing. Reika tells him not to lose the tablet again given how important it was. She walks away. Takasugi couldn't believe he just had a conversation with Reika. According to the guidebook, Hanagasaki Reika was the young lady of the Hanagasaki conglomerate. Everyone has heard of her. In the original game, her starting equipment is excellent and she will progress to become a magic specialist in the future. Additionally, she's cute when she blushes, but until that happens, she's a true ice queen. If the player is going for a magic party, she's a must-have for the team. Takasugi reads Reika's info on the school's rooftop. He comments that she was so popular that even someone like him, who hasn't played the main game yet, knows her. He exclaims in delight that just being in the same class as her makes him feel like anything goes. However, he suddenly turns serious because the original game had a permadeath system, short for permanent death. In a game, you'll have to start from the very beginning again if you die, losing all progress. It just showed how harsh the world was. There was even a possibility of the protagonist's own party dying, not to mention him. With conviction, Takasugi was determined to use the guidebook to become strong no matter what. Later on, in a place called the Champion Crest Hall, beds are lined up and a man is getting a tattoo. Another man sits in front of Takasugi. He asks him where he wants the tattoo, and nervously, Takasugi replies that he wants it in the normal place. He lies down in bed, bare back facing the man. Darkly, the man tells him that he already had a contract with a high-rank guild, so Takasugi should be honored to be tattooed by him. Champion crests were something like a magic mark that makes someone able to use magic. This system also allows someone to learn special spells by getting the tattoo, makes you wonder how anyone just seems to be able to get one. Since he was super weak and now he's getting one, Takasugi stands before a full-body mirror, looking in amazement at his new tattoo. Walking down the school hallways, he suddenly wonders if it was okay to have the man from earlier to give him the tattoo. Kind of horrible to ask that after you already let the guy stick a needle in you. The strategy guide didn't say who the player should be tattooed by. Takasugi brushes the question away. The only thing important was that he got the tattoo for lightning, and surely everything would go well. Back in class, Reika is showing off her abilities to other classmates, the protagonist is studying with friends, and Ayano is having an arm wrestling match. While Takasugi was reading the guide, Furuta comes up from behind him and whispers that it was finally time for the after-class dungeon dive. Grinning maliciously, he tells Takasugi that he didn't think anybody would team up with him, so he shouldn't expect anything. As Furuta leaves him alone with a mocking laugh, Takasugi picks up the guidebook and decides to follow it. Later on, in a locker room, Takasugi opens the door and peeks in. He unlocks a locker by the end of the room, and in the very back of the locker he finds a 50 yen bill. Takasugi exclaims in excitement. It may not sound like a lot, but yen in the game world was worth about 100 times the yen in the real world. Takasugi suddenly stops, his expression complicated. He knows he's in an RPG, a role-playing game, but stealing other people's stuff still really doesn't sit well with him. In gaming terms, we call that looting, and I say it's all fair game. He brushes the thought aside, deciding that he didn't have a choice for now since he had to follow the strategy guide. Going around the school, Takasugi continues to find magic scrolls, more money, and even potions. Finally, he had quite the haul of magical items. He puts them all in a pack, and with a wooden stick, he is finally ready to enter the dungeon. The dungeon entrance is located underground, past a small staircase and large wooden doors. Takasugi enters and immediately checks his strategy guide. The guidebook tells him that to start with, he should hit himself with as many bolts as he can. Oh, he's screwed. According to the guide, to become a good swordsman-type class, he needed to hit himself with magic attacks to raise the hidden magic resistance stat. He had to do it before leveling up because he can no longer pass magic dodge checks, and thus can't increase the hidden stat. Takasugi had to do it in the dungeon because the dense ether in the air gives him a bonus to health points and mana points recovery. No matter what build, there was no avoiding this part. Bolt was the spell he got from the champion crest. It was a lighting type magic Y skill. He waits for monsters to appear near the entrance, but none come close. Raising his hand, Takasugi readies his attack spell. He fires at the wall and bolts of lightning shoot from this hand. When the light clears, scorch marks are left on the wall. He's amazed that it worked. Takasugi decides to start grinding his secret stat right away. Hesitantly, he puts his hand up to his chest, which sounds like a horrible mistake because you're shooting lightning straight to your chest. He summons a bolt of lightning. The attack is instantaneous. It fries him, almost making him lose consciousness. He falls to the ground, breathing heavily and in complete shock, pun intended. He crumples into a ball. He screams in his head, rather sure that his heart had nearly stopped and killed him for a moment there. According to the guidebook, Bolt inflicts a paralysis condition, and you point it at your chest, to boot. He struggles to get up on his knees, complaining that he had to endure that much pain more than a few more times. He leans back on a wall. Deciding he was prepared for another hit, he summons the spell once more, now pointing at his legs. He cringes in pain. The hit hurts, but nowhere nearly as badly as the first one. Yes, because for one, it's not aimed straight for your heart. His flesh was burning and giving smoke, so it was no simple injury either. After enduring the pain for about 5 minutes, Takasugi recovered. He lifted his pant leg to find his burn completely gone. He comes to the conclusion that it was the increased recovery buff applied by the ether. He shoots a bolt of lightning through him again, on his chest again. He falls flat on his back. It still hurts. If he kept things up, he was going to go crazy. He crawls back up to his knees and consults the strategy guide. According to the book, the world was supposed to have defensive items known as rings. Equipping these rings apparently reduces damage taken. Back in a tool storage, which I'm assuming is a small shop for artifacts, the lady at the counter hands Takasugi a paper bag with the image of a slime and a ring. Like the name suggests, it was a slime ring. While in the dungeon, Takasugi slips it on. He keeps walking down the corridors until he notices something. As he turned a corner, a party of adventurers were looking over a map of the dungeon. It was the protagonist, along with Reika and Ayano. Suddenly, Reika turns around and notices him. Her eyes brighten at the sight of him, much to Takasugi's confusion. Eventually, the protagonist's party moves on ahead. Takasugi is suddenly concerned about how he looks in front of the popular kids, but he sets down his backpack and takes out his strategy guide. It couldn't be helped if he drew attention. After all, he was quite in a blessed situation. Why do I get the feeling that you just jinxed it? Doesn't help that we haven't seen the bully in a while. Takasugi continued to train himself by using Bolt on himself. Sparks of lightning shoots out from his hand and make the slime ring glow. It should be better called a bracelet, but we'll keep on calling it a ring. Takasugi prepares himself for the pain to take over him, but when nothing comes, he looks down at himself and exclaims. His body still smoked from the attack, but he never felt the damage. It was much better than before. Now he thought he would be able to pull things off. Making sure to remember his health points, Takasugi proceeds to cast Bolt again and again on his legs as much as he could. While at first a perfect dodge never triggered at all. Now, after 2 hours, he raises his pant leg and finds it free of wounds. But suddenly he hears a strange sound. He turns around to see a slime floating a few feet away from him. He exclaims as it comes rushing towards him. It hits him square in the stomach. It bounces back as he stumbles. Takasugi is able to swallow down the bile rising in his throat. He coughs as he takes out his stats tablet and sees that he only had 1 health point left. That's way too close for comfort. He pops open a health potion and drinks it all in one go. Sparkles surround him as he fully recovers. Internally, he thanks someone called Master Tony for giving advice to bring a potion to the dungeons. I think Master Tony is supposed to be someone from the guidebook, but don't quote me on that. The slime stayed a few feet away from him. And so while dodging the odd slime that came to attack him again and again, Takasugi kept mindlessly working to raise his magic resistance. As to why he didn't just kill the thing and be done with it, I have no idea. Back at the student dorms and late into the night, students from his class loiter around the dining hall. Takasugi enters the room, looking absolutely beaten all over. On the screen of the dining hall television was a girl with twin tails holding a lance. She plunges her lance into the side of a large monster. The students in the dining hall watch on in amazement. They comment that Ikujin Kyuko's guild was incredible. Apparently the girl with the lance was in the night class, shrugging off attacks as if they were nothing. Takasugi watches from the back as they continue to watch the battle in awe. Later on in bed, Takasugi is staring at his ceiling. He wonders out loud if he'll end up somewhat similar to the guild from earlier. He felt like people were avoiding him, maybe because his stats were too low. He cringes, thinking that at the rate he was going, he might be expelled for being too weak. He tries to convince himself that surely he won't be, but he has no answer for himself. The next day, the class is gathered around the dungeon entrance. Today was the day of their long-awaited dungeon dive, which is funny because Takasugi has been on his own dungeon dives for a while now, I think. Takasugi grins, thinking that it was no problem since he already had the strategy guide and thus he was fully prepared. But he loses his smile immediately. It was bothering him that regarding the date of the entrance ceremony, the strategy guide was one day off. It would have been fine if it was just a misprint, but he wondered if something happened in that world that's not part of the game. He whispers in panic to the book to not let him down since it was all he got. Finally, it was time to enter the dungeon. They needed to go to the second floor and come back. According to the strategy guide, as long as he sticks to the other students, he'll be able to make it back safely without the need to fight. So, Takasugi's plan was to just stick close to everyone. According to the tablet that morning, almost all students are at least level 3 by then. If you killed the dang slime from before, you would have raised a level or two. Currently, the highest levels in the class were the protagonist's party, which was at level 4, Ayano, who was at level 5, and finally Reika was at level 6. Takasugi's thoughts are suddenly disturbed when Furuta slings an arm over his shoulders, mocking him for still being in level 1. Takasugi starts to break into a sweat. He keeps laughing at Takasugi, attracting the attention of other students. Furuta laughs at him for not being able to defeat a single slime, and Takasugi tries to defend himself by saying that he hasn't fought one yet. Their conversation is cut short when one of their classmates offers to help Takasugi level up. Takasugi is speechless. It was Ichiju Kazuma, the protagonist of the original game. He had everything. Good looks, high stats, and he was even able to use special magic. Takasugi, thinking he was nothing compared to Kazuma's skills, nervously turns down his offer. Kazuma nonetheless smiles, telling him to look for him if ever he needs help. Kazuma walked away. Another classmate tells Takasugi that it was in everyone's best interest to make the weakest member in the class be stronger for the class competition exam. The other classmate's name was Kazama Yuji from the protagonist's party. Yuji calls out to Takasugi as he leaves and tells him to come to them if he needs any help, and then he follows after Kazuma. Furuta suddenly leans closer and tells Takasugi to take Kazuma up on their offer. Internally, Takasugi is pissed that his bully was suddenly acting all nice when the protagonist arrives. He thinks that Kazuma's concern is unneeded and just hopes he would leave him alone. He couldn't raise his level yet. All he could do was follow the strategy guide, had to double check, and finally understood that it meant not leaving level 1 at all. My bad. Sorry, Takasugi. Later on, the school bell rings and Takasugi races down the hallways, excitedly thinking of grinding his hidden skills. He heads back to the dungeons and immediately uses Bolt on his legs. Shockwaves run through him, but when the dust clears, Takasugi exclaims as he took no damage. Even his clothes didn't take damage. Nice. He pulled off another perfect dodge. As he was celebrating his rising skill level, something was creeping closer to him. The same slime suddenly rushes into him. Takasugi dodges just in time, much to the slime's surprise. Takasugi happily exclaims that he ended up raising his physical dodge skill while he was practicing. The slime is pissed at the turn of events. Suddenly, a sharp piece of ice flies through the air. It hits the slime with precision, killing it in one go. Rather mad at the killer, Takasugi turns around sharply but stops short. It was a beautiful girl holding a magic staff. Takasugi looks on in disbelief. It was Reika. She hesitantly asks if he was okay. He awkwardly thanks her for saving him. Internally, Takasugi wonders to himself why he was trembling and saying weird stuff. If he kept acting like that, weird rumors were going to start, like how he showed concern for a slime or how he even needed saving from a slime. Reika asks if he needs help. Takasugi hesitates before he comes to his senses. He shouldn't be attracting more attention to himself. If anything, the people he should stay the furthest away from were the main cast of the game. He imagines monsters running around the whole world, eating the characters, and comes to the conclusion that if he interfered with the protagonist, he might end up leading the world to ruin. He bluntly tells Reika that he didn't need any help and asks her what she wanted, kinda rude considering that she did pretty much save your ass. Reika answers that she came to check the place because she heard someone speak, but she saw now that things were okay. Takasugi turns around and tells her that if she didn't need anything, then she could leave him alone. There's a pause between them as he moves to leave first, but Reika asks him if he's leveled up yet. Takasugi nervously replies that he hasn't. Concerned, Reika suggests that if he was having a hard time, he could just have someone help him level up enough to beat one by himself. Frowning, Takasugi replies that he wasn't having a hard time and that he could beat one himself just fine. Internally, he feels like he seemed less unsociable and just more stubborn at that point. But if that was the case, he thinks he should just cut the conversation as short as possible. Turning around, Reika finally says that was fine and leaves him alone. Takasugi wonders why she was down in the dungeons all alone too. Focusing back to his task, Takasugi recalls that in the strategy guide, the fighting style it was guiding him towards is full-on offense. He can't try to dodge or resist any attacks, taking all damage and then just using potions to recover fully and keep on fighting. Can't help but think that one wrong move or forgetting his potion and he's dead. Master Tony also added not to buy any armor, because not only is it heavy, but it offers no resistance to magical attacks. All his money was to be spent on potions and weapons. Frowning, Takasugi was a bit reluctant to get hurt too much. Although this was a game world, if his stomach was hit, he could still puke. If his head gets struck, he might get a concussion, and worst of all, a game over means instant death. With a small excited smile, he decided it was time to buy equipment. And thus, he walked into the school store. The shop is filled with items meant for magic, from jackets to bottoms and even masks and glasses. Takasugi marveled as the shop had all sorts of stuff. He turns to the side and something catches his eyes. It was an awesome set of equipment. Whoa, now that does look cool. Complete with a leather jacket, cargo pants, and fingerless gloves, Takasugi's eyes shine at the sight of it. He checks its stats to find that it had high defense and fire resistance. Making up his mind, he decided he needed the whole set. Leaving the store with shopping bags in hand, he sighs at the idea that he was flat broke again. But since he was going back to the dungeons, it was for the sake of getting better gear. Although he said he had no other choice, he excitedly takes his first steps in his new equipment. Now he's looking the part of an adventurer. He readies his stance, placing a hand over his leg and casts Bolt on himself. When the dust cleared, he and his clothes remained intact. Thanks to his more than 15 hours spent on grinding, he was starting to get the hang of the complete evasion skill. Apparently, once the skill reaches 100, its magic resistance will hit 100% too, and after that, each additional skill point will reduce damage by another 1%. Back in school, the teacher is looking over his tablet. He suddenly exclaims to see that Takasugi was still at level 1. As his classmates turn to him in disbelief, all Takasugi can do is smile awkwardly in response. His teacher tells him that he needs to get to level 3 as soon as possible or he'll be in danger since students can even die in class. Takasugi tells him that it was none of his business. Takasugi, are you for real? He's your teacher. Of course it's his business. The teacher says that he couldn't let that slide since he was responsible for their lives. Sometimes it can't be helped. What the hell do you mean by it can't be helped? But if someone dies below level 5, it becomes the teacher's responsibility. Takasugi can't muster a reply to that anymore. He looks back to his tablet, searching for the student with the highest level. Currently, it was Reika. She's surprised to hear her name being called out. The teacher makes her responsible for getting Takasugi to level 3, ordering it be done by Monday. Without hesitating, she agrees. The whole class exclaims in disbelief. Furuta angrily clicks his tongue, asking why a guy like Takasugi was going to be spending time with Reika. Internally, Takasugi was the one pissed at the idea that they were forcing him to level up with someone else when he was grinding by using his secret grinding method. After classes at the dungeon, Takasugi receives a message from Reika to wait for her in the classroom after class. Takasugi lets out a heavy sigh. He had ignored her completely and came straight to the dungeon. He was starting to find it a real pain. Just as he mumbles it aloud, Reika comes up behind him, demanding to know why he was running away. Her sudden presence scares Takasugi. She asks him if he was saying that he had a problem with her. Takasugi tries to say that he just wanted to do things at his own pace. Reika pauses for a moment before admitting that she knew what he's been doing there in secret, so there was no need to hide it from her. Takasugi exclaims in shock. Takasugi stands frozen. He couldn't believe that he was being watched. The hidden stats he was raising were supposed to be values that the people of that world can't even perceive. He suddenly comes to the conclusion that Reika had only seen the situation but had not exactly understood the reason why. Reika tells him that he can keep casting Bolt on himself all he wants, but if he came with her, she can at least help him with the bare minimum of leveling up. Takasugi looks away and tells her that he couldn't level up just yet. Reika stares at him seriously and asks him if it was really in his best interests. Takasugi tells her that it was necessary, but he also admits that he couldn't prove it. Reika pauses before asking Takasugi what was the point of doing all that. With determination, Takasugi answered that it was to become the strongest. Reika repeats his answer, and when he confirms that he meant it, Reika stays quiet before she seems to think something. Internally, Takasugi thinks darkly of how being laughed at right then would kind of sting. Reika then tells him that it was a wonderful goal, but it wouldn't be easy since it wasn't a game. Takasugi seriously replies that it was, much to Reika's confusion. "You can't just be dropping lore bombs, Takasugi." She's not impressed and thinks he's just joking. If he keeps being stubborn, her reputation will suffer too. A silence falls between them. Finally, she supposed that he'd just run away even if she tried to force him, so she instead settles on lending him a necklace. Takasugi is confused until Reika tells him that it was a necklace that restores mana points. More after that, she would heal him whenever he lost health points. That way, they would be able to save more time. She says that it shouldn't be such a bad deal for him. Takasugi agrees that it wasn't that bad an offer, but internally, he wanted to jump at the chance since waiting for his health to recover naturally had been pure agony. She says that he can continue until his self-harming habit is satisfied. "I just realized that to other people who don't know the real reason, what he's doing is more than concerning." But she makes him promise that once he's had his fill, he'd better let her level him up properly. Takasugi finally agrees. He tells himself that it was a huge help for him, but internally wonders what was in it for Reika. In a panic, he wonders if she knew about the guidebook. "Brother, I think you're just paranoid about everyone to a concerning degree." He decides that there was no point in thinking about all that for the moment. If all things went well, he'll be free from the whole ordeal, and Reika's reputation would be kept safe. He borrows the necklace from her. Later on, he casts Bolt on himself once more. Lightning crackles all over and leaves him slightly hurt, but Reika steps in and heals him. In an instant, any possible wounds are gone. Takasugi stares in amazement as warm light enveloped him while he recovered. His health points were restored by Reika's magic, and his mana points were rapidly refilled by the power of the necklace's ether crystal. Even though Reika's class is supposed to be a mage, it seemed that she also had a crest of healing. Calling for Reika's attention, he straightforwardly asks if she could show him her crest of healing. Reika is caught speechless, her face completely red. Looking away in embarrassment, she says that his request was the kind of thing someone should ask their girlfriend to do or something alike. "I just remembered that the tattoos can be in intimate areas." Whoops. She relents nonetheless, pulling her cape back. Much to Takasugi's embarrassment, Reika lifts her top to show the crest of healing on her lower back. At the sight of it, Takasugi observes that it was a complex third-generation crest. He makes the comment that it was as expected of a noble. Tucking her clothes back in place, Reika is surprised that he knew so much about it. After all, it was a secret art of a certain noble family until recently. She asks him if he asked just to show off his knowledge or if he had ulterior motives. Takasugi tells her to interpret it however she liked. Bro has a way of responding with poorly made answers. Internally, he thinks how pretty confident Reika was with herself. She asks him what kind of crest he, the great Takasugi as she calls him, who aims to be the strongest plan on getting dot. She adds that she was asking for reference. He responds that he planned on getting a 4th-generation healing crest and one more, but his words are cut short when Reika reminds him that there were only 3 generations of healing crests. See? Poorly made answers. In his thoughts, Takasugi realizes he slipped up and remembers that by the world's standards, she was right at the moment, but he really did plan on getting it. Brushing her question off, he turns around and cuts the conversation right there, telling her that the rest was a secret. Reika's mouth twitches at his words. She quietly says that she understood that it was a secret from her. No, she doesn't, and that they should go back to casting Bolt. She raises her hand, a dark look in her eyes. She offers to help him cast Bolt. She looks like she's going to fry you alive. Terrified, Takasugi refuses. He switches topics and comments that she had quite a lot of time on her hands when she could have spent it on leveling herself up. Reika smiles, telling him that there was no need to worry about her. Her level was already so high that she couldn't find anyone to party with anymore. "I thought she was a part of the protagonist's party." Takasugi is rendered speechless. Takasugi thinks of how Reika seemed to be unapproachable at first, but now he found her surprisingly easy to talk to. And so for the next 3 days, they continued to grind his hidden skills late into the night. His magic resistance skill, which had barely improved over the first 2 days, began to rise sharply on his 3rd day. Reika probably had no idea what was happening. The look on her face tells me she knows at least a bit though. From Takasugi's perspective, successful evasions led to skill gains, and those skill gains led to more successful evasions. It was the ideal feedback loop. He got greedy and decided he wanted to raise his physical resistance in addition to magic, so they took off to explore the first floor of the dungeon in search of slimes. The moment they arrive, multiple slimes sprout from the ground and bounce towards him. A particularly aggressive slime leaps into the air and tackles the side of his body head-on. Takasugi panics as his health starts to go down, but Reika just sighs and takes out her staff. Raising it above her, magic shoots out of it, hitting each slime precisely and successfully, killing all of them. Takasugi is awestruck. Reika sighs in relief, but it's short-lived. Something sneaks up behind Takasugi. Reika exclaims at the sight of it. Takasugi turns around. Before he could react, Reika runs in and shields Takasugi from a large attack. It sends both of them flying nonetheless. They lay down on the ground, Reika more hurt. They stare nervously at the slime that stood before them. It was much larger than them, wearing other slimes on its body and a sinister grin on its face. The slime stands before them menacingly. Reika slowly starts to get up. She tells Takasugi that since he was trying to avoid leveling up, he should stay back. Takasugi is speechless as Reika stands up and prepares herself for battle. With a swing of her staff, a hail of ice shards is summoned and heads straight for their enemy. The large slime takes multiple hits from the ice shards, one of them piercing it right between its eyes. With a successful hit, the slime starts to melt back into the dungeon grounds. All that's left is a slight snowfall caused by Reika's magic and the two of them. That ended way too quickly. I thought there'd be a lot more to the slime. They head deeper into the dungeons. Takasugi summons Bolt again and is covered in lightning. When the smoke clears, his face is ecstatic. He was hit, but he barely felt any pain. He exclaims that his skill had improved. Reika, bewildered, asks what he means. Takasugi is too lost in his happiness to see anything wrong in admitting to Reika that he's been raising his hidden magic resistance stat, and that was why he doesn't take damage from magic. What an absolute dumbass OMG. However, he adds that someone can only do it when their magic power is low, but he was completely negating it. The full force of his words hits Reika and she takes a step back. With a shaky voice, she tells him that his exploit was the level of a state secret. Realizing his mistake, Takasugi tries to control the damage done and pretends to be bashful as he says that it was just something that he happened to figure out by himself and asks her not to tell anyone about it. Reika panics even more, angrily telling him that he should be the one watching his mouth because if anyone finds out that he had that kind of knowledge, they'll be after his life. Completely valid response from her. Takasugi finally realizes how careless he was, seeing how he really scared her. He reminds himself to be more careful about leaking information from then on. He tells her that at least now she understood what he was doing. Reika eventually calms down, realizing that for her it was already too late to learn the exploit. With a grin, he tells her that wasn't true. He explains that because she was in a magic-based class, her spirit stat would go up anyway, so she didn't need to do the same thing. For magic jobs, she could raise her physical resistance and evasion skills against slimes. He encourages her to train those skills. Reika is confused and speechless. Night falls and Reika and Takasugi are on their way home. They're a little scruffed up, Takasugi a lot more than Reika. He bids her goodbye, saying he would see her tomorrow. Before she could leave, Takasugi apologizes for making her worry, assuming that that was why she was keeping an eye on him. Her face goes red. Look at that blush, whoa! She scoffs at the idea, saying it was impossible for her to ever worry about him. She turns around, saying with a shaky voice that he had soured her mood, hearing him get a little full of himself. With that, she leaves him. He just smiles as he watches her go. Internally, Takasugi was thankful for her worrying about him because he ended up magaying to hit level 3, also learning the common skill appraisal for the first time. At first, Takasugi thought Reika was trying to uncover his secrets, but she most likely just saw his initial stats, and that was her way of worrying about a bottom feeder like him. He focuses back to his next goal to hit level 5 and achieve a class change. Health points, mana points, strength, and durability were easy to raise, so he was going to change his class to Bishop, back at school. That day's class was field training with a quota of obtaining magic stones in the dungeon, or so he was told. Takasugi was completely left out of the 3-person parties. That's rough, buddy. Suddenly, he hears a voice behind him, playfully teasing him. It was Reika and a familiar ponytail-haired girl. Reika invites him to join their party. Takasugi stares. The other girl was Shinguji Ayano. Reika turns to Ayano, asking if it was fine with her. Ayano joyfully agrees, admitting that she found being alone with just Reika rather scary. Reika, caught off guard, asks what was so scary about her. Takasugi doesn't hold back and calls her the Ice Queen, someone who looked like she would kill anyone without flinching. Reika is rather pissed at his words, but Ayano laughs at his bravery. Eventually, Ayano mediates between them and tells them to calm down because for now, they are going to call themselves a party. And so with that, for some reason, Takasugi ended up in a party with Reika and Ayano. For his current stats, he had 30 health points and 15 mana points. His magic power and durability were at 15, strength at 14, spirit at 11, and finally, agility at 10. They've barely grown, but at the very least they were outside of the single-digit range. He was genuinely happy that his strength and agility went up. They entered the dungeon right away and made it to the second floor. Reika suddenly stops and senses a presence. She takes a fighting stance, shielding both Ayano and Takasugi. Since Takasugi was weak, she ordered him to stay back. In front of them was a goblin. Ayano laughs at Takasugi before taking a stand next to Reika and saying that putting him in the back might be the right call. Takasugi's eyes twitched, thinking their words were rather harsh. But in reality, he actually had a new weapon he received from the store. A sword materializes behind him, and he unsheathes a ninja blade that deals an additional damage of 30 points. Takasugi passes by Ayano and Reika, telling him that he'll take the front line, much to the surprise of both girls. Ayano comments that his weapon looks fine, but it would be useless if he couldn't use it properly. Takasugi replies that he would master it in no time. Ayano summons a spear in hand. She masterfully twists it around in her hands before jabbing it at the goblin. It hits right between its eyes, killing it instantly, much to Reika and Takasugi's shock. Ayano smiles in triumph. According to the strategy guide, the Shinguji family ran a spearmanship dojo that was popular with militant guilds. Takasugi nervously looks at her, realizing that it was the reason why she was so strong. In the original game, militant guilds are basically outlaws, who sometimes attack or capture other guilds. It meant that Ayano, who had ties to such outlaws, might actually be more dangerous than the average noble. He's snapped out of his thoughts when Ayano playfully grins, saying that the goblins weren't a big deal, so he wasn't going to have a turn. Suddenly, Reika yells for Takasugi to look out. He turns around to see a goblin leaping up to attack him. He dodges its claws in time. He fixes his hold on his sword as the goblin lands on its legs and readies to attack again. Takasugi takes a battle stance, focusing on attacking. The goblin lunges again and Takasugi swings his sword, slicing at the goblin's chest. Takasugi grits his teeth, pissed that it wasn't enough to deal a killing blow. Suddenly, the goblin fiercely lunges and ends up dealing a scrape to the side of his arm. It's enough to draw blood, but the goblin is close enough. He pushes through the pain and raises his sword high in the air. With all his strength, Takasugi cleaves at the goblin. It slices clean across it from above, tearing it in half. Reika and Ayano gape at him, speechless. Takasugi breathes heavily, exhausted. Ayano advises him not to push himself too hard since he is still too weak. Takasugi looks at his sword. Damage accumulates with the number of attacks, and a full power strike powers a serious punch. He came to the conclusion that he was starting to understand how to fight in a way that was unique to their world. Ayano suddenly notices something. They look up to see them surrounded by a horde of goblins. How the hell did none of you notice them? Takasugi starts to panic at the sight of them. Their party and the goblins are at a standstill. Takasugi is slowly losing his mind at the fact that they were surrounded, breaking into a sweat at the idea that he was going to die right then and there. Before he can continue to spiral, a staff is tapped on the floor. Reika closes her eyes and starts to chant a spell, a magic circle appearing behind her. Large snowflakes of sharp ice surround her before shooting at high speeds towards the goblins. The ice hit the goblins with precision, instantly killing most of them. Ayano rushes in. She leaps into the air and drops into the middle of a group of goblins, her spear twisting around her. She swings her weapon and cuts the goblins surrounding her in half. In just a few short moments, the horde of goblins around them have been taken care of. With a short sigh of relief, Ayano comments that it was rather a big group, and since there was no one who comes to that part of the dungeon as much, they could really gather up some experience points. Takasugi pauses. He dejectedly tells Reika and Ayano that if they kill everything, he won't be able to get any practice. Reika counters that she found him so stubborn for someone so weak. You're not even catching strays, you're throwing yourself right into enemy fire, Takasugi. He turns his back to them and brushes off Reika's words, telling them that pretty soon he'll be the strongest. Ayano laughs wildly at his words as he walks away. Takasugi doesn't look back or doesn't respond, not that he got anything good to retort. After all that, he was finally able to reach level 5 and he was able to learn the common skill from his item box. As they exit through the dungeon entrance once more, they hear yelling. A blast of magic hits a young man. The young man is pushed back a few feet, falling on his back in front of a group. A fierce-looking party looks down at him. The woman that seems to be leading the group, seemingly the one who attacked the young man. Takasugi and the rest watch the fight between the two parties. Even though it was more one-sided than anything. Ayano comments on the nastiness of the situation while Reika notices that they were the A-class students. She turns on her heel and starts to leave in the other direction, stating that they should stay away from them given how arrogant they were being. Ayano follows close behind while Takasugi sticks around for a few more minutes. He continues to watch, thinking about how as someone who was always getting hassled by delinquents, a part of him found the scene of watching the other party get beat up satisfying. But the nobles of that world would never tolerate such rude attitude from commoners. Takasugi turns to leave. Later on, after school, Takasugi goes to a spot just past the river and not far from the academy and to a waterfall basin. Takasugi takes out a manju bun he bought from the store, which is a Japanese pastry, basically a dense bun with a sweet filling. He throws the manju bun right into the waterfall basin and it sinks right in the middle. After that, he goes on one knee and offers a prayer asking a deity to lend him their strength. It's quiet in the waterfall before it's lit up with light. Suddenly, a large being appears before him, balanced over the water. Takasugi is surprised at its sudden appearance. The being agrees to lend him its abilities. Takasugi is enveloped with the being's power as it gives him their blessing. According to the guidebook, the bishop class grants an additional 100 more health points and 80 more for strength, magic, and endurance each. Among the classes unlockable at level 5, bishop was the strongest. It had stat bonuses and high growth values. It's highly compatible with both frontline and rearline roles. To unlock it, the player must receive the blessings of the Japanese deities tied to water and protection, Ryujin and Seiwatsuhime. It was set to have the hardest difficulty for someone who's trying to be the strongest. Putting yourself immediately in hard mode sounds like not a good option. After successfully completing his class change, Takasugi then came to the research institute attached to the academy. Takasugi is suddenly on alert as a man nears the lab where he was waiting. A peculiar-looking man with mismatched eyes and tattoos all over suddenly realizes he's there. He stares at Takasugi for a while with interest. Pointing to him, the man says that he had perfect timing because he just finished a prototype for a new crest. He asks if Takasugi would like to be his test subject and if he still had enough space on his body for another tattoo. Takasugi immediately thinks of the term mad scientist, but he nods and goes with the man into the lab anyway. You're just as crazy for going with a man who just said that he had something new cooking up and wanting to test it on you immediately. Inside the lab, Takasugi is lying face down on a medical bed with his wrists tied and an oxygen mask on. On his back is a brand new tattoo that takes over most of his skin. He opens his eyes and, seeing the scientist, asks him if he could also add Fortitude 1, Swiftness 5, Exorcism 4, and Summoning 2 to the tattoo. The scientist is surprised at his request. Looking rather annoyed, he tells him that he was demanding too much just for lending some space on his back. But then he stops and thinks his request through and comes to the conclusion that the idea wasn't such a bad build. After that exchange, Takasugi lost consciousness. When he woke up later on, the chains on his wrists and the oxygen mask were gone. He gets up from the bed and walks over to a full-length mirror. He turns around to see the new set of tattoos that decorate his skin. He exclaims in amazement at the sight of the large markings, almost like a snowflake across his back. It appeared like the scientist had given him all the crests after all. He managed to get crests that someone normally couldn't obtain without meeting special conditions, all for free. Suddenly, he hears someone behind him. It was the scientist. Just like the guide said, the man really was the inventor of the Cure-N pattern. Suddenly, the scientist asks who exactly Takasugi was with. Takasugi suddenly starts to panic, realizing he should have read the guide more carefully since he was suddenly coming up blank right then and there. Gotta love that this idiot went to the mad scientist's lab without any clear direction on how to proceed. Pretending to be innocent, he lies and says that he just got separated during a tour and was just looking for the exit. The scientist suddenly grabs him by the shoulders and makes him promise him that he won't tell a soul about what happened. Takasugi nervously promises that he won't tell anyone, especially since the scientist gave him so many crests. The scientist yells that he didn't care who he showed the ones he asked for, but he shouldn't dare to show anyone that crest he asked to carve on Takasugi. Takasugi makes sure to promise again. Finally reassured, the scientist changes the topic and asks him where he based the crest build on. Takasugi starts to panic again, coming up with the excuse that it was just a spur-of-the-moment idea. The scientist raises an eyebrow, saying that he figured that most amateurs would want flashier magic. Meanwhile, Takasugi's seems plain at first glance. However, the combination of crests he chose was as if from the millions of possible combinations, they seemed to be selected with terrifying precision to handle any and all situations. With a mad look in his eyes, the scientist felt like it was a build devised by someone who knows even more crests than he did. Takasugi stays quiet. Suddenly, the scientist turns around, all tension gone, as he comes to the conclusion that the idea was impossible. He leaves the lab, muttering to himself that maybe he needed to start researching combinations from then on. Takasugi is left behind, speechless. Later on that night, Takasugi walks down the school corridors towards the dorms. It was completely dark then. He happily thinks how since he was now a bishop, he could use heal. He had the Fortitude crest to boost his strength, Swiftness for agility, Exorcism to remove debuffs, and finally Summoning to let him use summoning magic. He grins at the idea that he got all the crests needed in one go. As he passes by another corridor, he suddenly notices something and his face darkens in fear. He stared at the entrance to the dungeon. I wasn't aware the dungeon was right in the school's backyard, that's crazy. Slowly rising from the stairs was a terrifying human-like monster with horns and multiple eyes and mouths. Takasugi looks on, horrified. Takasugi watches in horror as the monster proceeds to walk into the dark. It starts to walk down the corridors like it was completely normal while Takasugi hides behind a tree. He fearfully peeks behind his hiding spot to make sure he was seeing right. His legs are shaking. He was sure of it. It was a shape-shifting monster that devours students at the academy and takes their place. However, Takasugi was sure it wasn't supposed to appear until much later into the story. Horrified, he considers the idea that the game becoming real caused an anomaly to happen, and now NPCs were moving around as they pleased. The monster was unstoppable. Even the protagonist, Kazuma, shouldn't have the power to defeat it at that point. Takasugi wasn't sure who it was going to replace, but someone at the school was definitely going to die. At his current level, all he could do was stand by and watch, and if by some chance its cover gets blown while it's disguised as a student, the thought alone terrified Takasugi. Later on, back in the dungeon, a bloody Takasugi shouts as he swings his blade wildly, slicing at the side of a slime. The slime, having taken enough damage, starts to burst with light before completely exploding into pieces. Takasugi gets a notification that he has leveled up. He celebrates as he finally reaches level 6. Currently, he was Bishop level 3, all his stats more than 21, his highest being magic power, which was at 31. He had holy magic equipped for his skills. He wipes at his brow with an exhale. Behind him, a voice informs him that the boss was dangerous and orders him to fall back. He turns to find Reika. With a frown, Takasugi tells her not to worry because he had taken the monster down plenty of times. Reika is obviously confused with his words, unable to believe him. Takasugi's face is blank, but he's internally offended at the idea that she still thought he was still weak. Understandable. He had spent the last 10 days grinding and hunting 1,150 slime bosses. Now that's a crazy grinding session, OMG. And finally, after all that grinding, a certain loot item finally dropped. It was an ancient ring that granted additional 300 points to health, 30 points to magic power, and 8 to damage reduction. According to the guidebook, of all the rings someone can find in the game early on, the ancient ring provides the biggest health boost. If the player is the type of person who absolutely hates getting a game over, it might be worth grinding to obtain the item. The description was a little vague on its value, but for Takasugi, it was a must-have item right then. In any case, he had finally managed to reach level 6. Time passes and their class is back in the dungeons. Takasugi is unamused to find that he's once again stuck with Ayano and Reika for his 3-person party. Ayano is immediately offended at his reaction, pointing her spear angrily at him. According to her, everyone was avoiding her and Reika because their levels were so far ahead already, so they did the favor of picking Takasugi up since he was left in the dust. She tops it all off to say that he should be thanking them. She adds that she heard that he was still grinding on the first floor and accused him of never improving. With a dark grin, Takasugi challenges her words. Deeper in the dungeons, a wolf-like monster appears before them. It lunges at Takasugi immediately. It goes for his shoulder and bites, but Takasugi buries his sword deep into its body. The wolf freezes as the sword goes completely through it. The monster explodes into nothingness, and Ayano is speechless. Takasugi staggers to get back up, slightly pained but still lightly smiling. Ayano asks Takasugi as he gets up if that was the same sword he used before and if he got it resharpened. Takasugi scoffs, accusing Ayano that she only thought he was able to catch up because of his weapon. A vein pops up on Ayano's forehead and her smile is stiff at the idea that Takasugi had apparently caught up to her. Reika, meanwhile, stares at Takasugi in amazement. She observed that he hadn't taken any damage, he's gotten much tougher, and his attack power was on par with Ayano. To top it all off, she asks how his magic was just as powerful as hers. Takasugi reasons that with his current durability, the monsters in their current area couldn't even put a dent on his health points. Internally, he starts to panic that Reika had noticed that something was off. However, he was sure that she probably won't press him on what class he chose. Ayano cuts in on the conversation, telling Reika not to lump her in with a scrub who had never broken a sweat in a proper dojo. She gets a dark look in her eyes as she says that their leveling has stalled, so she suggests that they try the 3rd floor. She sarcastically ponders if that floor was still too much for Takasugi. Internally, Takasugi thinks of how Ayano just wanted to prove she was still stronger than him against the monsters on the 3rd floor. Reika thinks about the idea and remembers that the monsters on the 3rd floor used magic. She's concerned if they might be rushing things. Realizing what she was trying to say, Takasugi asks them if they had never been to the 3rd floor. Ayano's smile is rather shaky as she states that it was also Takasugi's first time on the 3rd floor. She says that just going to a new floor significantly increases the risk of dying, and again she asks sarcastically if it was still too soon for Takasugi. Takasugi stays quiet to her taunts. They end up proceeding to the 3rd floor. Immediately, they're greeted by shaman-like monsters holding wooden staves. Their party gets into position for a fight. With a wild swing of its staff, one of the monsters blasts a powerful blow towards them. Just as Takasugi seems to hesitate, Ayano is focused. She masterfully dodges the magical attacks and leaps into the air above the monsters. The monsters are dumbfounded as Ayano swings her spear down. She cuts the monsters in half, killing them instantly, and they explode as she makes her landing. The victory is short-lived as Takasugi and Reika see one of the monster's attacks had shot through her shoulder. Takasugi softly exhales. Holding out a hand towards her shoulder, Ayano's wound starts to glow. Beneath his gear, the crest on Takasugi's back is activated as he uses magic. Slowly but surely, the shrapnel that impaled Ayano disappears and her wound completely closes. As Takasugi turns back around, he states that she was weak, and with a teasing grin, he tells her not to push herself. This is the kind of petty behavior that I approve of. Make sure they're okay enough to handle more pettiness to keep them humble. Ayano's face completely flushes red at his words. Their banter is cut short when someone calls for their attention. A rough-looking three-person party tells them that they were in C-class students' hunting ground. They order Takasugi's group, which was built on D-class students, to get out. The C-class crew were the type who've been dungeon diving since middle school. They were most likely 5 levels higher than Takasugi and the rest of the party. The other group continues to stare them down until Takasugi is forced to retreat. As they leave, Ayano angrily states that they were being blatantly harassed and acting like tyrants. Reika tells her to calm down since they were currently no match for them. And so, during their dungeon diving classes, harassment from C-class students became rampant. Within their class, resentment towards them was starting to boil over. In the midst of all that, a joint swordsmanship class for the entire grade was announced. A harsh-looking instructor calls for the next student and Takasugi stands up. A young man clicks his tongue. The man exclaims at the realization that his opponent was apparently some bottom feeder from D class. Kind of makes me wonder, when was the last time that anyone checked Takasugi's stats for him to still be known as a bottom feeder in his class? You'd think everyone knows that he's one of the highest ones now. The rest of the students sneer and laugh at him. Takasugi understood that his opponent planned on taking out all the frustration he gets from the upper classes on him. He figured they probably spent all their time bowing and scraping before the A and B classes. Takasugi was sure all the frustration was bubbling up by then. A jagged weapon catches the light. With a terrifying aura and a dark grin, the student says that although their blades were blunted for training, he was still going to make it work. Takasugi readies his own weapon as the other students jeer at him. Takasugi's opponent looked disappointed, but he thought that it was the perfect chance to see what the C-class was made of. With a terrifying aura of his own, Takasugi is fired up to test his own strength. Takasugi and his opponent stare each other down, ready to fight as they take in their battle stances. With a shout, their instructor orders them to begin. Almost instantly, his opponent lunges, and with a terrifying yell, he swings his blade down at Takasugi. Takasugi stumbles away just in time. His opponent is caught off guard that he missed, and in that short moment, Takasugi holds out a hand and casts Bolt. "Brother, I could be wrong, but I don't think you're supposed to use magic in a dojo." His opponent is sent back flying as he's struck by lightning. The student takes the damage at full force, but he's able to stay standing up. He yells angrily at Takasugi for using magic in a sword fighting class. My thoughts exactly. A group of strong men sneered at him, one of them saying that he didn't care how they fought as long as they continued. Both Takasugi and his opponent turn to the man in shock, his opponent suddenly nervous. "Takasugi, this is your fault. Why are you so surprised?" His instructor remains quiet. Giving orders like that and completely ignoring the teacher, Takasugi was sure the group of strong men were definitely from the A class. He guessed that it was their idea of a ranking ritual. Recovering from his shock, Takasugi's opponent casts Flame Burst. He summons fire from his hand and throws it right at Takasugi. The flames envelop him. It burns for a while, but when it eventually clears, Takasugi remains standing, although sustaining some injuries. His opponent is pissed. He lunges and makes a swing at Takasugi, who's able to counter it with his own sword. Swinging his blade wildly, his opponent delivers multiple attacks at Takasugi. Takasugi is able to block most of them, although struggling. His opponent slices at him one more time. It sends Takasugi sliding back, but he's still able to maintain standing up. The man from the A class loudly comments that he found it pathetic that someone was losing to someone who was only from D class, to be fair. C class bro didn't know he was going against a complete leveling up maniac with a cheat sheet. Takasugi's opponent takes the words to heart, anger rising even more. He starts muttering an ancient language to himself. When he raises his blade, it's engulfed by magic. He grins madly as his blade roars with flames. Takasugi stares in shock at his opponent's use of a blaze skill that could imbue his sword with magic. His opponent smirks and in a flash disappears from in front of Takasugi. Before Takasugi could react, the other student was right in front of him. The C-class student delivers a powerful swing. It hits Takasugi point blank and sends him flying. He crashes into the dojo walls by the other spectators. When the dust clears, Takasugi finds himself wounded enough to bleed from his mouth and somewhere on his head. The other students are terrified at the sight of him. Takasugi exhales slowly before holding a hand up to himself and casting heal. Lights takes over his face and slowly closes his wounds. His opponent is lunging for him again. He appears right beside Takasugi. Takasugi has a split second to react and raises his sword just in time to block. The opponent's blade still sends him flying, but Takasugi protects himself. As he gets enough distance from the C-class student, he holds out a hand and casts a spell. His opponent is once again hit by lightning, seemingly stronger voltage this time. The C-class student is fried stiff, standing up from the aftermath of the shock and rendering him paralyzed. Takasugi stays vigilant, waiting for his opponent to make another move. "You paralyzed him, bro. I think you can relax for a few seconds." The A-class student from before officially declares the match over. Takasugi's opponent, finally able to move again, tries to reason that the fight isn't over yet. But the same A-class student stands his ground and tells him that he lost the moment he failed to counter Takasugi's magic. Takasugi lightly smiles at his victory, despite the glare of his opponent. Meanwhile, the A-class student calls for the next fight, pointing at Furuta and ordering anyone to take care of him. One of the A-class students rises, much to Furuta's fear. Long story short, Furuta got beaten into a pulp, much worse than Takasugi or his opponent. As the day ends, Takasugi makes his way back to his classroom. After that brutal class, he found the atmosphere as gloomy as a funeral. Apparently D-class getting utterly crushed like that was an annual tradition, and it seemed like the teachers just turned a blind eye to the discrimination clearly made against them. A voice calls out to Takasugi. Behind him was Reika, and beside her was a girl with a looping hairstyle. She greets Takasugi excitedly, saying they haven't met in a while. Takasugi stares quietly at the girl until Reika rhetorically asks that surely he remembered the girl being Amatsuka Yuko. Yuko grins at him, but Takasugi awkwardly smiles, saying that it was his first time hearing her name. Yuko is in shock that he couldn't remember her given that they went to middle school together. Takasugi tries to rack his brain for any memories. He internally wishes that the game would stop adding hidden backstories since it was making his heart race. Yuko reasons that she was out sick until recently, asking bashfully if he really did forget about her. Takasugi nervously tries to answer, but Yuko cuts him off, rather pissed, realizing that he really did forget about her. Takasugi plainly states that he didn't need a lecture on common sense from someone with pink hair. Pretty sure Reika has blue hair though, so isn't it normal to have abnormal colored hair? Reika explains that since Yuko had a low level because she was absent, Reika was helping her out. However, she wanted Takasugi to help Yuko out too, as repayment for his debt to Reika. I'm assuming she's referring to helping him train? If you're feeling confused, so am I. Internally, Takasugi thinks of how Reika's meddlesome personality was acting up again. He thinks of Yuko as another stray Reika had picked up. Amatsuka Yuko was a fairly popular heroine. She was a magic specialist who focuses on healing. Though optimistic and easygoing, she also has a gentle side and is always full of energy. At the start of the original story, she's been absent from school for about a month due to poor health. That's wild considering she's a healer. Back in the classroom, a discussion about the discrimination against D-class was about to begin, so Takasugi slipped out alone and headed for the dungeon. All he wanted to do right then was raise his level, so he headed straight for the 7th floor of the dungeon. When he arrived at the 7th floor, it looked to be like a wasteland, with fallen rubble and broken swords struck to the ground. Down there, in addition to monsters called ghosts that can only be defeated with magic, zombies and skeletons also appeared. The enemies use powerful magic, so normally it was a floor that everyone just skipped. But the truth was that if someone had the bishop class, the enemies could be taken out with a single high heal. Takasugi raises a hand and delivers a powerful burst of light at the monsters coming for him. They sizzle out in an instant, leaving nothing behind. Takasugi lets out a sigh of relief. Ever since he had information about that efficient grinding spot, he couldn't help but think to let the others have their stupid turf wars. Night falls as he continues to train. The next day in school, one of Takasugi's male classmates points a finger at him and says that he was going to be the one who drags all of them down the most. Apparently, during their meeting on their loss to C-class, Takasugi's long-haired male classmate, amazing that he doesn't know his name, wanted to pin all the blame on Takasugi. Takasugi frowns at the words, asking what he meant by dragging the class down. He asks if they planned on starting a war with the upper classes. Takasugi knew that according to the guidebook, if they just let the story play out, a conflict was bound to happen eventually, but the A-class leader was a real pain. He was an opponent with mystic eyes. Takasugi wasn't even sure he could win against the A-class leader at level 20. So instead of wasting resources on pointless conflicts, Takasugi really just wanted to focus on leveling up. The long-haired classmate yells at his face that they were trying not to be looked down on by the upper classes, and Takasugi was the one holding them back. Completely calmly, almost terrifyingly so, Takasugi replies that his classmate should just focus on raising his own level because he was in no position to be worrying about anything else. much to his classmates' anger. Finally, someone cuts in. Kazuma says that fighting amongst themselves wasn't going to solve anything. However, Yuji Kazuma's friend argues that if they don't fight against them at least once, then the harassment from C class would never stop. Kazuma is quiet and so is the rest of the class. The gap between Takasugi's D class and C class, who've been diving into dungeons for 2 years, wouldn't be easy to close. Takasugi figured that he could probably close it, but he couldn't let anyone know about the strategy guide. Ayano suddenly adds on to the conversation, saying that they've already seen that just talking about it got them nowhere, so she preferred everyone just try to keep a low profile for the moment. With glittering eyes, she says that she wanted to aim for the top, and so she had no intention of losing to that kind of harassment. Takasugi figured that Ayano was just trying to tell them to just shut up and level up, and he agreed that was probably the best solution. While the rest of his class was arguing about starting a fight, Takasugi ignored them and went to level up on the 7th floor. And in just 1 month, Takasugi had already reached level 20.